We often begin our classes at Brown in contemplative studies with a few moments of silent meditation. We signal it by 3 bells and end with 1 bell. So I'd ask you to please stop what you're doing and tune into how you're sensing your bodies as they're seated in the chair. And take 3 deep and relaxing breaths, becoming aware of your whole body-mind in space and time, sensing in all 4 dimensions, height, width, depth, and time, your spheres of experience. So we'll stop for a few moments to begin our ceremony today with a couple of moments of silence. Slowly open your eyes. My name's Hal Roth. I'm the director of the Contemplative Studies Concentration and Initiative. And on behalf of all of our faculty and students, I am very, very pleased to welcome you today to our inaugural commencement ceremony for Contemplative Studies. Fortunately, or for better or for worse, I happen to have received my PhD from the University of Toronto. In Toronto, the graduation ceremony is usually held at the beginning of April. So the academic regalia features wool robes. So this is one of the uncomfortable aspects of receiving a PhD from Toronto and not finding a job in Canada. I'm very happy to welcome parents, siblings, family members, and friends. I'd like to say a few words about contemplative studies and the significance of this day and the work that your children and siblings and family members have done here. Your daughters and sons are graduating today in a very important new academic field that we have helped to pioneer here at Brown. The Contemplative Studies concentration, approved here a mere 2 years ago, now has 20 concentrators. Your children are the very first graduating cohort. We began developing this field 14 years ago. At the time, I didn't realize the extent to which we were playing what people call the long game. We started with a faculty forum on cross-cultural approaches to what was then called contemplative mind. A mind, a consciousness that is attentively focused, fully aware of what it is experiencing internally and externally. A mind that is well integrated into the body. A mind that is often intuitive and insightful. It has been our contention that there are a variety of methods and practices that lead to such distinctive states of mind. They are both experienced spontaneously and unreflectively in moments of deep absorption in an activity, and they are also deliberately cultivated within the world's great wisdom traditions. These experiences, while different in effects, are not fundamentally distinct from one another in kind. Rather, they occur on a spectrum from the total absorption in an activity that you might have in a game of chess or in playing a sport, to the deeply transformative experiences of lifelong yogis in samadhi, of Jewish mystics in devakut, or Zen monks' moments of satori. They are all inherent in our potential as human beings, a significant part of our natures that can yield greater physical and mental health and pro-social experiences of compassionate and authentic engagement with the world. Such contemplative experiences, because of their potential to transform individual lives and contribute significantly to the greater social good, are worthy, we feel, of special studies in their own field. And that is what we have attempted to do in establishing contemplative studies as its own academic field. When we started out, actually in 2002, and I remember one day kind of looking around the room, around the table in which we were meeting, and really we were a pretty motley crew. And what I saw there was a band of misfits, all on the progressive fringes of our fields, and certainly more at home in our temporary associations with one another in this group than in our home departments. We began with advising independent concentrations. Our first student was Kate McSwain, who graduated in 2005. We were eventually able to make use of existing opportunities at Brown to advise 15 other independent concentrations, the last of whom is graduating today. What we were able to forge is what I like to call a guerrilla concentration, in which we made use of existing opportunities to allow students to create their own independent work that focused in the area of contemplative studies. Of course, when we were officially recognized, we lost that status, which I still kind of like the sound of and the ethos of. But when we were accepted 2 years ago, it made it much, it basically brought contemplative studies within reach of many more students. Many of you may not know this, but getting an independent concentration is a very tough slog. You have to convince a committee of faculty that your concentration is something you cannot do in any other existing concentration. And our success rate has been relatively good, but still even 50% means that half of the students who have applied have not gotten the independent concentrations. It's a very difficult thing to do. Now, once we're established as a formal concentration, students can more readily sign up, although we still insist that they give us, in order to become concentrators, a fairly rigorous plan of what they are going to be doing in the next few years. So as scientific interest in contemplative states and traits developed and more researchers delved into consciousness, we slowly but surely expanded our group of core faculty. Psychologist Willoughby Britton, who eventually created the Lab for Clinical and Effective Neuroscience, joined us in 2006 and is now working with religious studies scholar Jared Lindahl on a phenomenology of contemplative experiences among many projects, with a mountain of data which will hopefully get analyzed sometime in her lifetime. Catherine Kerr joined us in 2010. She's a neuroscientist who leads the Mind and Body Lab for neuroscientific research into traditional Chinese practices of Qigong and Tai Chi. Eric Laux, an epidemiologist who does longitudinal and latitudinal? No, I don't think that works. Longitudinal studies on the effects of mindfulness on hypertension treatments came on board in 2014. And together with a group of humanists in philosophy and religious studies, in history and social scientists in sociology and anthropology, and artists in theater arts and English, we've come together to create a rich curriculum of course offerings that not only includes these different academic disciplines, but also integrates them into distinctive approaches that combine traditional third-person, at-a-distance study with innovative, critical, first-person, direct experiential approaches. So contemplative studies as a field begins with a vision that the sciences, the humanities, and the creative arts do not have to be, borrowing the words of the late evolutionary biologist Stephen Jay Gould, the non-overlapping magisteria that they have been conceived to be in the academy in the 20th and early 21st centuries. They are instead mutually complementary modes of investigation into the full range of phenomena we experience in our lives. In contemplative studies, we focus on consciousness as it is embodied and as it is enacted in concert with the many and varied contexts of an environment that we co-create. Simultaneously, environment and individual arise together and can best be studied by a methodology that combines third-person modes of knowledge, such as we find in the brain sciences, religious studies, and philosophy, with critical first-person experiential modes of investigation that include the arts. In addition, in contemplative studies, we recognize the importance of second-person, one-on-one, unself-conscious, intersubjective experiences, and also of the no-person, spontaneous synthesis of all these elements into the unified whole of our individual and collective experience. Each of you daughters and sons has had to meet a demanding concentration in either the sciences track or the humanities track, with one exception. That includes a set of courses, of core courses that require study of the other track. So if you're a humanities concentrator, you have core courses that include science courses, and vice versa for science concentrators. But in addition to this, each of your sons and daughters has brought something unique into our program. Their particular set of life experiences in which all of you, quite obviously, have played very significant parts. Through their courses of study, they have each forged distinctive concentrations that we hope have given them not just a knowledge base with which to enter specific fields of endeavor as they leave here, but an experiential grounding that will allow them to weather the various challenges they will face throughout their lives with equanimity and with resilience, and also sensibilities that I am sure will allow them to make a difference in the world. In going out into the world with this foundation, they will be following in the footsteps of many of our previous concentrators. At the 10th anniversary celebration we had last fall, 11 of our previous independent concentrators returned, and we found out that they've already gotten involved in a fascinating range of professions. This is my attempt to explain to you all, especially family members, what do you do with a degree in contemplative studies? It's funny, but I also have been concentration advisor in religious studies, and that's also a question that I had to answer. So I have some experience in answering this, and actually it's a very interesting and varied set of occupations that our students have become involved in. This includes clinical psychology, graduate work and practice and neuroscience, education, peace studies, community organizing, working with disadvantaged youth, journalism, prison reform, nursing, medicine, osteopathy, philosophy of education, music teaching, working with tech startups, and even one of them has become deeply involved in the organization of Burning Man, which some of you may know about and may have even attended. In short, a full range of careers in service to society in which the contemplative perspectives and practices that they have mastered during their time here are serving them well. So, we are inaugurating this year a prize for the outstanding senior project, be it a capstone paper or senior thesis. We have decided to establish it in the name of the late Francisco Varela, one of the true pioneers of the field of contemplative studies. A brilliant Chilean biologist and neuroscientist, Cisco was the first author of one of the most important books in our new field, The Embodied Mind, which all of your graduates have read at least once. He was co-founder also of the Mind and Life Institute that has had a major influence on supporting the advancement of the scientific study of contemplative practices. His particular insight as well was to demonstrate the range of phenomena that we group under the rubric of contemplative experiences can best be studied by the combination of third-person scientific and philosophical perspectives of skilled from cognitive sciences and phenomenology combined with first-person perspectives of skilled meditation practitioners. Hence, the field of neurophenomenology was born. And its distinctive synthesis of third-person and first-person perspectives are the foundation for the unique methods of our field we call integrative contemplative pedagogy. For these reasons, we feel it fitting and appropriate to name a prize for the outstanding work by senior concentrators in his honor. For a more detailed biography of Francisco Varela, please see the program. So this year, in the inaugural presentation of the award, we have a tie. And we are awarding it to two of our graduating seniors. It happens to also, and they did not know about this until this moment, it also happens to carry with it a prize of $500. So as I call your name, please stand, and after I summarize your topic, please come forward to receive your award. So the first of our two prizes goes to Catherine Michelle Murphy. In this capstone, Katie studied the nature poetry of Chinese Taoists and Buddhists, in particular the famous 4th century author Tao Qian, and later Chan Buddhist inspired poets such as Wang Wei, by the way, the man from whom never to ask directions. Sorry. And Stonehouse, the man whom you never hired to build your home in an earthquake zone. In Katie's essay, she argued that the poems are not only the product of a contemplative process, but also that reading them was such a process as well. In doing this, she creatively combined both third-person study of the history and philosophy of this particular form of mountains and rivers poetry with the first-person engagement with the contemplative perspectives of relating the poetry to her own experience with considerable skill. And I am therefore pleased to award the Varela Prize for Outstanding Senior Project to Katie Murphy. You're welcome. Our second prize winner is Alex Joanne Flores Tameno. In reporting the results of a mindfulness-based hypertension therapy focus group that she conducted during the first semester of this year, Alex Temenia demonstrated a fluency with relevant scientific methods and a considerable facility to clearly and comprehensively present complicated qualitative research data. As part of a much larger project on this method developed by Professor Eric Laux of the School of Public Health, this study demonstrates another aspect of the field of contemplative studies, the very interesting decontextualization of attentional training practices from religious traditions and the recontextualization of them within modern scientific research models. The clarity and quality of presentation of this specific research that Alex accomplished was exemplary. For these reasons, we are very pleased to award the Varela Prize for Outstanding Senior Project to Alex Temenia. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Before moving on to what you all came here for, the presentation of the diplomas, I would like to introduce some of the people here today who have contributed significantly to the education that has been provided here for your children. I want to begin by introducing to you our Fulbright scholar from India, who has been in theater and performance studies this year and who has taught your children this wonderful class on Indian performance. Please stand and let's recognize Priyadarshini Shome. I would next like to introduce to you a colleague who has been part of the long game in establishing contemplative studies here at Brown. Theater and Performance Studies dance professor Michelle Bach-Kulabali. Also here today and celebrating her 10th anniversary of coming to Brown, please welcome Professor Willoughby Britton. And please also join me in welcoming Kogut Humanities Professor Jared Lindahl. Expecting maybe one or two others, but I don't see them, so we'll move on. You know, there's a very concrete way, and it's a little hard for you to see from the outside, in which our concentrators have been part of this wonderful community of former and current concentrators. And so a number of them are here today to celebrate along with their brothers and sisters in the concentration. So I'd like to actually ask each of you, as I call your name, to stand, and then after everyone has stood, then we can acknowledge you all. So first, I want to ask our graduate from last year, one of our independent concentrators, Chloe Zimmerman, to stand. And Juan is not here, right? I don't see him. So also please stand. We have a number of junior concentrators who are here today. Misbah Narani. Ana Alejandra Lara. Ann Fosberg. Jackson Milnick. And Henry Langton. And I would, of course, be completely remiss if I forgot to mention the one person who's most responsible for this event actually happening in this room, with this food, with this tables, with this setup. And this is the Contemplative Studies Project Coordinator and my good friend, Ann Hireman-Hart. Please stand. And now for our graduates. To hand out diplomas today, I am delighted to introduce to you Sarah Eaton Stewart, a member of the class of 1987 who concentrated here in law and public policy. Ms. Stewart, who trained in the same Harvard Law School class as our president, and I don't mean Chris Paxson, had an extensive career in corporate law before personally discovering the positive impact that mindfulness meditation could have on her life. She is now Chief Business Development Officer for Mindwell, a company that has developed a mindfulness training program for business and education that can provide a continuing practice that helps to embed mindfulness in one's daily activities, so it's not a kind of one-off experience that you do for a day, but becomes a part of your life. Please join me in welcoming Sarah Stewart. I hope these are in alphabetical order. Let's see. Yes, they are. Oh. Thanks. So as I call your name, graduates, please stand while I say a few words about your work here, and then come forward to receive your degree. Our first graduate is Natalie Nguyen Cutler. Natalie wanted to work out a contemplative studies. By the way, our acronym is COST. I think those of you who are parents will also realize that there's a bit of an irony in talking about a concentration at Brown in terms of cost. Anyway, it's an acronym for contemplative studies. Natalie wanted to work out a contemplative studies concentration in the creative arts, which we had not been able to formally put together, but we were able to work out a concentration that was officially in the humanities, but in which she was able to take the arts courses she wanted while meeting the science and humanities requirements. Her program featured religious studies courses such as the concept and practice of love, Buddhist meditation, vulnerability, courses in the philosophy department, and theater arts courses that featured her true love and focus in her concentration. The dance courses she did with Michelle Bhatt-Kulabali, the artists and scientists as partners with Julie Strandberg, and classical Indian performance with Priyadarshini Shome. Her capstone paper dealt with the many dimensions of the psychology of flow that are associated with creative performance. And when I remember Natalie, I will never forget her incredible performance in the spring dance concert last year, in which she shinnied up thick silk ropes that dangled from the ceiling of the stage with a broken metatarsal in each of her feet. And of course, I will never forget the inspired production of the Ramayana, in which she and two of our other graduates, Carly and Katie, performed so skillfully under the direction of Priya Shome. So from the time I got to know Natalie and her interest last year, whenever I heard the following song, I thought of Natalie, and it's the Eagles song, All She Wants to Do Is Dance. So please join me in honoring Natalie Nguyen Cutler. Congratulations. Our next graduate is Patrick Loftus. Patrick first manifested himself in our Great Contemplative Traditions of Asia course and quickly demonstrated a totally original mind. It wasn't until a year later, however, in the classical Chinese philosophy of life that I realized how much we shared a love for our favorite Chinese philosopher, the 4th century BCE Taoist Zhuangzi, which has become, along with a few Taoist-influenced Chan Buddhists from half a millennium later, part of Patrick's way of being in the world. I think every time I've seen him in the past year, he's been carrying a copy of the Zhuangzi somewhere on his person. Being simultaneously trained in anthropology, Patrick approaches these teachers with the social scientist's eye for nuance and a deep interest in their forms of contemplative practice. I also discovered in the Chinese philosophy course that he has a well-cultivated sense of the best rock and roll songs of the 60s and 70s, which just by chance happens to agree with my own sense. In that class on Chinese philosophy, Patrick and I started exchanging rock videos, often inspired by ideas that popped up during discussion. I think we started with the Yardbirds. Now this is something you young people probably won't know about, except a few of you, maybe like Jackson. The Yardbirds, The Shape of Things to Come, and Over, Under, Sideways, Down, and Cream's I Feel Free. Patrick was a pleasure to have in seminars because he always asked the most interesting questions coming from a very unself-conscious perspective, and usually a perspective that I had not myself considered. Unsurprisingly, he wrote a wonderful capstone paper on Zhuangzi and cognitive science. Because he has this immensely inquisitive mind, the song that arises for me when I think about Patrick is Neil Young's Tell Me Why. Please join me in honoring Patrick Loftus.
Thank you.
Well done, man. Well done. Our next graduate is Carly Melissa Quirk Margolis. Carly was first a classics concentrator with a considerable facility in Greek and Latin before she discovered contemplative studies as a junior. Her work for us featured deep engagement with Greek philosophy, Asian Buddhist theory and practice, and neuroscience that included several semesters of applied work in the Britain lab. Her capstone was an ambitious project that probed the neuroscientific basis for the Tibetan Buddhist teaching of compassion. She has also, during her years at Brown, been a devoted teacher of yoga to undergraduates and a leader of the student-run yoga and mindfulness group. I spoke to her often in office hours and came to appreciate her very pure and compassionate heart and her devotion to her studies and her devotion to help other people. All of these qualities have prepared her for her first job as project manager for the Mind and Life Institute in Charlottesville, Virginia, which she will start next month. The song that naturally arises for me when I think about Carly is the Beatles' All You Need Is Love. Congratulations, Carly. Our next graduate is Catherine Michelle Murphy. Katie walked into my office hours in the fall of 2014 and said, "Tell me more about this contemplative studies thing. What is it all about? Why should I concentrate in it? How does it relate to philosophy? And can I really learn to meditate in it?" She'd begun taking a course on classical Chinese philosophy of life, was already asking the most challenging and difficult questions in class about Shang Dynasty divination practices and about the I Ching or Book of Changes. I had many talks with Katie in office hours about all kinds of topics, and she seemed quite unsurprised when I talked to her about the ins and outs of faculty and administration politics. In class, she always seemed to have this unique facility to bore into the details of a topic and not stop until she had figured things out, at least for the time being. I was surprised, though I actually shouldn't have been, to learn that while she was fully engaged in her studies, she established a really good and successful business that brought genuinely good coffee at a reasonable price to the Brown campus. I think of Katie's love for Chinese poetry, for classical Taoism, and for the creative approaches she took to getting the most out of her university education via GISPs and DISPs and and I know that she burns with a kind of intensity that can best be characterized in terms of rock music by Heart's song, Straight On. Please join me in honoring Catherine Murphy.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Katie. Well done. Finally, our last concentrator being honored today is also the last of our independent concentrators, who we are very pleased to have decided to join this cohort in receiving her diploma. She could have also received it and walked with the independent concentrators. So please stand, Alex Joanne Flores Tamenya. Alex is one of the few students I've had over the 3 decades I've been here who I would describe as being a force of nature. She did a rare Bachelor of Arts, 5-year BA in Contemplative Studies and BSc in Neuroscience. She was often in my office getting support for one project or another that was incredibly well thought out, or at least it appeared to me to be, and planned down to the smallest details. In her bachelor's degree of arts and bachelor of science, she combined work on contemplative practices and modern psychology to investigate human flourishing and well-being. But she really also did lots of work in dance with Michelle and also worked in the Britain Lab. Her coursework, not surprisingly, included theater arts and dance, religious studies, neuroscience, and psychology. Her research included the aforementioned qualitative research on mindfulness-based hypertension therapy with Eric Laux, and an examination of the American mindfulness movement in education and in corporations, and also an ethnographic research project on the role of Buddhist practices on social and emotional well-being in a high school in northern India. This is a lot that she has gotten done. And this has given her the foundation to develop her own business in teaching mindfulness to young people. When I think of Alex, the rock song that comes to mind is the Rolling Stones' She's Like a Rainbow. For the ways in which she has put together in her study here the major perspectives of contemplative studies, the arts, the sciences, and the humanities. Please join me in honoring Alex Tamenya. Congratulations. Well done. Keep in touch. So, I believe that that might be a little chaotic. We have some champagne in the back of the room. That's a good idea. So Anne is going to put bottles of champagne on the table, which we can use to toast our concentrators. So it's going to take a few minutes to do this. Please relax. And in a few minutes after the champagne gets distributed, I'll ring the bell one more time so that we can toast the concentrators for our inaugural class of graduates in contemplative studies. Congratulations, graduates.